We're going to bring on our first guest tonight, and we are going to be giving away the advanced reading copy of her book. So this is her book, her latest book. It's called The God of Good Looks. And our guest is Breanne McIvor. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. It could be Breanne, but she will tell us how her name should be pronounced. And we welcome her to Black Authors Matter TV.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, you pronounced it perfectly.
Oh, okay. And you write about life in the Caribbean, but you do it from a fictional standpoint. And this new book came out in May. We just hadn't had a chance to get you on the show since it came out. But just give us some background on why you chose the Caribbean as your setting for your books.
Sure. Well, I am born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. The only time I lived outside of the country was when I did my degrees in the UK. And so it just felt so natural to me to write about home and to write about what I knew. And I think that because I lived in the Caribbean for my whole life, everything that was around me was pretty normal. And it was only really going away to study and then later getting early readers' impressions of this book that I realized that some of the things that maybe I took for granted about the Caribbean or about Trinidad was surprising to some people. And they would say, oh, I didn't know that you had this in Trinidad, or I didn't know that it was like that. So I was very happy that the book was able to have those conversations, but I just think I was drawn to it because it's home, it's all around.
So what are some of the things that people don't know about where you're from?
I think one of the things that surprised people is that the book is set in the Caribbean beauty industry. And one of the main characters is a sort of legendary Caribbean makeup artist. And I remember when I had early readers for this book, I would get comments like, oh, how is Obadiah Cortland so good at makeup if he's from Trinidad? Or where would he learn to do makeup in Trinidad? Or is this sort of fashion industry?
They don't have makeup in Trinidad?
Well, exactly. It was this sort of surreal experience where I'm like, okay, the book is fiction, but what I'm writing about is real. And so it's almost like you're defending your lived experiences through defending like a work of fiction. So yeah, and then I think on the reverse side, the other thing that surprised people was the crime, because Trinidad, we actually have the 6th highest crime rate in the world. And I remember when I was first pitching this book, there were people who said, look, the sort of Caribbean stereotype is, sun, sea, and sand. Let's lean into that a little bit. Like, you have to have, so much crime in the novel. So I think there were sort of surprises on different ends of the spectrum.
Well, a lot of people see the Caribbean as an extension of the United States, pretty much, and a destination for vacations. I know I haven't been to Trinidad, but I have been to, Jamaica several times. Where else have I been? Oh, St. Martin, St. Thomas, the Cayman Islands.
I've only been to the Bahamas.
I've never been to the Bahamas.
And that was on a cruise.
Well, all of mine have been on cruises. So that was all. It was all the cruise destinations. And I've been to Honduras and Belize and Costa Rica and Panama, but it's all cruise destinations. So I don't know, do the cruise lines, which cruise line comes to Trinidad, and where does it go? Where the ones that stop in Trinidad, where else do they go? Do you know the answer to that?
No, I don't actually know. We are not like such a big tourist country compared to a lot of the other Caribbean islands. Tobago who is Trinidad's sister island, they are more of a tourist country, but I don't think that we are as tourism focused, and never is that more apparent than when I go to other islands and I see what the customer service is like in other places. And I say, no, you're used to getting tourists. Like, it's not this good home. So I don't actually know how many cruise ships we get. A lot of the people who come to Trinidad sort of come on business. So we have like, a lot of business people who come and then they might stay, or our big tourist event is Carnival. So people might come, to wear the costumes for the sort of parade, that type of thing.
I've heard of it there.
Carnival. I'm gonna go to Carnival after I stop going to CrossFit. I need to get right to go to Carnival, because those outfits, they'll make you feel bad about yourself.
Listen, like I see some of them and I'm like, to wear this for 2 days, like I can't.
So tell us about your book, The God of Good Looks, and what is it about? What's
Sure.
your basic plot? Don't give us any spoilers or anything about that, but just what's the basic plot?
Spoiler free.
Okay.
So Bianca Bridge, she has been disgraced after an affair with a married government minister. She's fired from her job and she's basically like the laughing stock of the country. And she agrees to work for the only person who will hire her, who's this brilliant but temperamental makeup artist, Obadiah Cortland. And of course, Bianca and Obadiah don't get along. They have clashing personalities. But when Bianca's former lover, the minister, threatens everything that she's been rebuilt in her life, she basically has to ask if she's able to finally stand up to him, or if she's going to take it again and discover whether she and Obadiah are better working together or not.
Okay, so it's basically like a lovers. Is it like a romance?
It has elements of romance. I think that it is, there is this sort of will they, won't they kind of slow burn romance element to it. But it's also, I kind of think like Bridget Jones' Diary meets The Devil Wears Prada in Trinidad.
Okay.
I like that. So what did they give you the, because I've heard a couple of different sound bites, so to speak, but what was it that gave you the inspiration for this book? Was it the island itself? Was it the belief that this man can't do makeup, or what was it what was that one thing that gave you that inspiration?
I think that the inspiration came partly out of my lived experience, because I also used to work as a professional makeup artist. And I got into the industry previously having known nothing about it. When I went to the sort of like makeup artistry school to get a certificate, I was the only person in the class who wasn't already working as a makeup artist. And just stepping into that world blew my mind. It was something that was completely different from what I had experienced before. So just to give one example, one of the things that we were taught is like, okay, if you're a makeup artist, you can never just leave the house. You always have to be 10 out of 10, because the best advertisement for your services is your face. So beat your face every day, make sure your hair is done, make sure your nails are done. Like, you are advertising your services. And
makeup artist then, because I don't like wearing makeup every day.
Listen, I don't do it now, but after that class, I bought into that. I would be like, you need to give me an hour's notice before I go anywhere, because I need to do my face. And living in that world was the inspiration for writing this book. And then, like you said, but because Trinidad was what was all around, because it was the Caribbean beauty industry that I was working in, it just seemed natural to set it there. That's what I was most comfortable with.
Right.
And then I can bring in things like Carnival, because Carnival makeup is big business in Trinidad. If you are doing Carnival makeup, you're starting at midnight, sometimes before, and you have clients like all through the day. There are people who do, like 30, 40 faces, just having people coming on rotation. So it's also a chance to write about, those cultural elements as well.
Now, do you find a difference between the way you do makeup in Trinidad versus an American style of makeup? And I asked that question because I was watching a video yesterday actually, and a lady was talking about the difference between the American style of makeup and the UK style of makeup. And I didn't even think there was a difference. So I was just wondering if you had seen any differences.
I think that we are incredibly influenced by American culture. So all of the sort of dominant TV shows in Trinidad are American. Like, there are people who can tell you more about American politics than they can about our own local politics. And so I think that things from America bleed into Trinidad very much. I do think there's certain cultural differences. So specifically at carnival time, you'll see people who have like the really colorful eye makeup that they do to sort of match their costumes and that kind of stuff. But that's only at one time. And I think that normally when things are popular in the US, they tend to become popular not too long after in Trinidad because of yep. So the same celebrities, like just people are here, looking at like the makeup Beyonce wears on tour and sort of bringing that to makeup artists and saying, I want to look like this, so. Yeah.
So what is the main industry? What are the main industries in your country? And tourism is probably one, but what are the main industries?
I would say the big blockbuster industry in Trinidad is oil and gas. That is, the thing that energy is the thing that really earns the money. And because of that, that's why, like I said, we don't get a lot of cruise ships, because our industry in Trinidad specifically is just very oriented towards energy. So we have, there'll be a lot of platforms with people sort of extracting oil, and then a lot of businesses that spring up around that. So you'll have sort of companies serving it. Also, we have sort of like finance sector, manufacturing. But I would say that when you think of other Caribbean countries, some of them have like a 90% dependence on tourism. It's incredibly high. Whereas we have the opposite problem in Trinidad. They say we should try to diversify into tourism because we've been, an oil and gas country for so long. And especially with, what's happening in the world and the push towards things like green energy, there are lots of questions about, well, how is this industry going to survive in the future?
Perfect. I don't think we'll be giving up oil and gas anytime soon. It's too, there are just too many things that run on it, that depend on it. You can't just like make a switch like that on a dime or even a nickel or whatever. You just can't. It's too embedded in everything. So, but conserving and being more energy efficient is good, but I don't think we have to worry about that. And I'm in Texas, where oil and gas is king. So we have other things too. We have those windmills. When I went on my road trip, that windmill industry is picking up.
I would say this, be careful about falling into the trap of being a tourism country, because being from New Orleans, Louisiana, where we are known for tourism, you need people to work in the tourism industry. And when a person starts getting education to get their bachelor degree, their master's or doctorate or whatever, they don't want to work in the tourism industry. So there's a belief, and I have to do more research to see how true it is, but it makes sense to me. There's a belief that sometimes kids are being pushed through school just so they can work in the tourism industry, because if you have too much education, you won't want to do it. And it's going to take them longer to fill those jobs. And so New Orleans is known for having a weak education system. And that's one of the beliefs for it, that they're just pushing the kids through school just so they can work in the tourism industry.
Yeah,
that's an interesting angle. But a lot of these places that have tourism, when people do go to school, they end up with a brain drain in that a lot of the people who do go to college and get degrees end up leaving and doing other things. So
I think we have that here too. I think that just sometimes, I mean, Trinidad is very small. The population of Trinidad is like 1.3, 1.4 million people.
oh,
And
is that small? Okay,
yeah,
wow.
so it's really small. And so I think that sometimes you look out there, you look at a country like the US and you just think, well, there must be more opportunities there because of the size of the country, or maybe what you want to do is something that's very niche. And so it's quite common here to meet people who will say things like, oh, you have to get out of here. I think coupled with the crime, you know, that's quite common. And so there are sort of two sides of it. There are people who say, yeah, well, if everybody leaves, then what's going to happen to the country?
Right.
And people who say, yeah, but
At the
I
same
want to leave.
taking over your country, and you don't want that either.
Yeah, that's true. Criminals will take over. You know, the county that I live in, Harris County in Texas, has 5 million people. Just
You
the
see,
county has 5 million people.
we can fit into that.
Wow. Yeah, it's big. It's big. It's land-wise. It's really big, but you know, and we have a lot of people moving here too, because for work and so forth. So I did want to ask this question about, you said the books that you read about the Caribbean, a lot of them focus on the colonial past. And what is Trinidad and Tobago's past as compared to some of the other Caribbean countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think like a lot of Caribbean countries, our history is colonization, slavery, indentureship, and that history, like the sort of plantation society that literally existed in Trinidad for hundreds of years, just completely shaped the country and shaped a lot of the Caribbean. Because most of the indigenous people were exterminated. They were very small pockets. And then it was a country that was plantations, and the purpose was to make money for the mother country, England. And so a lot of books are sort of grappling with that history. And I mean, we became independent in 1962. So my grandparents, both still alive, you know, were born into a colony. Trinidad didn't exist when they were born. My mom was born just on the cusp of independence, and I always lived in an independent country. So even across 3 generations, you have people who, you know, knew different areas of colonialism. And then unfortunately, there are sort of aspects of the history, the plantation history, that sort of continue through to everyday life now. And, you know, there's a saying that I have in the book, sort of like something we say locally, like massa day done, to be like, okay, you know, like the plantation owners still aren't in control anymore. But I remember I was working somewhere, and, you know, sometimes you'd be treated in a particular way, like the people who are in charge would treat you just kind of like, oh gosh, like regardless of your job, you know, can you go and get the coffee? Can you go and do this? Can you go and do that? And, you know, we would say like, massa they done, don't they realize that? So you do see, you know, the history just continuing to sort of echo through the present. And a lot of books that I read were sort of set in colonial times, set in plantation times, sort of examining that history. And part of what I wanted to do here in this book is to be like, okay, but this isn't about that, those times specifically, but the characters are grappling with the effects of that society still.
So your book is a more modern,
Right.
You wanted to make it contemporary.
I see the value in both, actually, because I see the value in contemporary fiction, because we can't always live in the past. But at the same time, when we have books that draw on the past, it helps to keep that interest in the history of your country. It doesn't get lost. So I mean, I see the value in both, but I do agree, by focusing on contemporary, it shows that, hey, history is history, but we still have life going on now. There are still stories that are happening now. So maybe a little bit of both, you think?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that particularly because, during things like slavery and indentureship, we couldn't tell our own stories. So
Right.
people who were able to go back and write stories from, what would have been the perspective of their ancestors, there's also something powerful in that. And like you said, keeping the past alive, having a way to access, this, even if it's a book of fiction, is dealing with something that wasn't, the not too distant past, a reality of the country.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I love historical fiction. But I also like agree with you that, sometimes contemporary books, particularly for somewhere like Trinidad, which isn't somewhere that has a lot of, sort of international currency. There are countries like the US and India where people have a very clear idea of, what it's like. They're just such huge presences in the world. But when you're writing about a small country, sometimes there may be readers who may have never read a book set there before or hadn't really thought of it because it's, like just this tiny island in a string of islands in the Caribbean. So I do think, there's also value in the contemporary and in sometimes having a conversation with readers about, what might be the contemporary realities of a country.
It's a celebration of the country.
I hope so.
And I have another question about your country. In the last 10 years or so, several of the Caribbean countries have had hurricanes that have come through and been devastating, or tropical storms that have been very devastating and disrupted life for months. So have you all been spared from?
We
So,
thankfully have not had a really bad hurricane, but we have had really bad flooding, as in, people's houses being flooded, losing their possessions. I think that, it's gotten worse over time and with global warming. And because, the Caribbean, the islands are so small, they're completely surrounded by the sea. So if there's anything sort of like coming across the Atlantic, it's very easy to pass sometimes over the whole island. And I remember, flooding when I was a child, and that was a relatively minor thing. And it didn't happen with this level of frequency. Okay, yeah, there's flooding, and you're like, right, it might kind of come up a little bit. But the types of floods that we've seen recently, where people have lost everything, or landslides have destroyed houses, destroyed possessions, that has happened a lot more recently. And I think it's something that, honestly, it's just a question for all of the Caribbean in the future. How do, can you deal with this? Like, how do you cope with it? That type of thing.
I'm very glad you touched on that, because sometimes we forget, we'll see that a hurricane is coming and they'll say it's in the Caribbean and we're like, oh, it's in the Caribbean, it's not here. But we forget sometimes that, yes, it's in the Caribbean, but there are still people who are in the Caribbean who are dealing with these hurricanes. And, it's nice that it's not hitting our homes, but it's affecting somebody else's homes. So we should still be keeping those people in prayer.
Thank you. That's lovely.
and New Orleans has definitely had its share of weather.
I was just gonna say, yeah, like, I mean, it's something that, I think that anybody, once they're affected by that type of loss, even when you rebuild, it just sort of stays in the psyche, and this memory of what it's like to not have the basic things, and sometimes you don't even realize until something happens. It might be something small and you'll be like, oh, I should cut my nails, and then you're like, oh no, never got another nail clipper.
Yeah, or just not having power for several days. We have had our share of hurricanes in Houston, but when they come through, Houston is so big that it may affect one side of town and not the other. I forgot which one came through my area, and that was my first time being in the eye of a hurricane, where it comes through, then you're in the eye, and it's like the sun comes out and you think it's over, and then the other side of the storm comes through. I forgot which hurricane that was. It's been in the last 10 years, I want to say, or so. So it's more than a notion. We've been spared in terms of personally, we've never had our possessions or, flooded or anything. And where we are now, we're on higher ground. So, but you just never know. It's unpredictable, and you can track them only to a certain extent, because they change directions. You think it's going one way, it goes another way. So, well, I do have one more question before we end the interview. Do you have other books on the Caribbean? Is this part of a series or?
Well, this is my first novel, but I do also have a collection of short stories called Where There Are Monsters.
Okay.
And that is more about the sort of like kind of supernatural Caribbean, like it's looking on like a modern take on our folklore. And then with this, I just did, I think people who knew that book were shocked that I went into a book with like sort of makeup, fashion, and beauty. But I love being able to do such diverse things. And I'm hoping that it will be the first novel of many. So fingers crossed.
Okay. Well, HarperCollins sent us this one, and they sent us the advanced reading copy. So the trivia question that I had, we've talked about it so much during the interview that it won't work for a trivia question. So,
well, you know what? They should have been listening. We should go ahead and do it anyway.
Okay, we'll go ahead and do it. The author, Breanne McIvor, lives in which Caribbean country? The first person to answer gets the advanced reading copy.
Give me a chance to type it, y'all.
I sent it to you, so you should just.
I got it in there.
Okay, and hopefully I didn't make any mistakes. Okay, so thank you so much, Breanne, and congratulations on your book and continued success in your writing.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me. This has been wonderful, and thank you for everything you're doing for authors.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for sharing your story with us. And thank you for celebrating your country. This is why we read, so we can escape to other worlds. And this has given us the opportunity to do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, and by the way, we have an answer.
Yes, I saw that. So I think Lydia was first.
Yes, she was first.
It wasn't spelled correctly, but we know what she meant. So we will accept it. Lydia, you get the copy of The God of Good Luck. Yeah. So thank you again, Breanne, for being a guest on the show. And when you do your next book, hopefully we'll get an alert about it and we can have you back.
I would love that. I'm already looking forward to it.
Okay.
Put your link in the chat. So if anybody wants to order this book, go ahead and click on her link. It is in the chat right now.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great evening.
You too. Bye.